60 Minutes has a sterling reputation for investigative journalism. Are they wrong?
But that's not investigative journalism if you change someone's answers. If you ask her a question and she comes with a rambling answer that doesn't make sense, and you edit that out and insert another answer to a different question that seems more cogent. No, but it's not that. It's editing things to make deceptive editing.
Joe,
so in deceptive editing, you give people a different perception of who this candidate is than reality.
But you got to explain.
But that's not objective journalism.
I know, but
that's campaign.
Tonight, a storm of headlines, whispers, and heated online debates is pulling everyone into a political drama that nobody saw coming. According to multiple reports circulating across social media and commentary channels, a tense and uncomfortable moment unfolded during a long-form podcast conversation that has now ignited a firestorm. Fans are shocked, critics are arguing, and supporters on
Elon Musk, and I know Elon was on your show, and he's here in Austin, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. And we could talk about Elon, but he spent $270 million to elect Trump as president. Okay. I think that's absurd that any one person...
What's the most someone donated towards the Harris campaign?
They spent a lot of money on Harris as well.
They spent $1.5 billion just
combined
over the course of a couple of months.
You got it. All right, let me talk about it. So I'm not here just...
Both sides are scrambling to defend their version of events. To be clear, we are not claiming any of this actually happened the way it's being framed. What we are doing is breaking down the news reports, reactions, and commentary that are rapidly spreading and fueling this explosive narrative. The story making waves right now suggests that a routine conversation suddenly shifted into something far more intense. What was expected to be a calm, policy-focused discussion reportedly turned into a high-pressure exchange that left viewers stunned. Emotions ran high, voices reportedly tightened, and according to those reacting online, one guest appeared visibly caught off guard as the conversation took a sharp and unexpected turn. Clips are being shared, quotes are being dissected, and fans are arguing over who truly controlled the room. Commentators are claiming this moment represents something bigger than just a disagreement. They say it symbolizes a growing frustration with legacy narratives, carefully managed interviews, and what some call selective outrage in modern media.
They were suing 60 Minutes.
Yes.
Is, to my mind, historically, even around for a very long time, they're not infallible. But I think you look at most objective people will say 60 Minutes has a sterling reputation for investigative journalism. Are they wrong?
But that's not investigative journalism if you change someone's answers. If you ask her a question and she comes with a rambling answer that doesn't make sense, and you edit that out and insert another answer to a different question that's...
Supporters insist the conversation was unfair. Critics argue it was long overdue. And right in the middle of it all is a clash of personalities, ideologies, and reputations that has now taken on a life of its own. Social media timelines are flooded with reactions. Some fans say this was a long-awaited reality check. Others believe lines were crossed and respect was lost. Emotions weren't just limited to the people involved. Families, longtime supporters, and even fellow public figures are being pulled into the discussion, each adding fuel to an already raging fire. Screenshots, short clips, and out-of-context quotes are spreading fast, each one intensifying the drama. And here's where it gets even more intriguing. Several reports suggest that what really shook viewers wasn't raised voices or sharp words, but the quiet moments, the pauses, the hesitation, the split seconds where one answer didn't quite land the way people expected. Those moments, according to fans, are where the real story lives. And as more commentary channels weigh in, one question keeps coming up again and again. Was this
It's you're walking down a dangerous path. Suing media has the impact of intimidating media. All right, if somebody sues you, all right, let me finish, all right?
Okay.
Somebody sues you, why not you? You could be sued tomorrow, right? Because you are doing this, you're too sympathetic to this.
Right.
And Joe, you did that, and they have a big law firm behind you, and you're gonna have to spend zillions of dollars defending yourself. You know what? Next time you do an interview, you say, maybe I'm not gonna go in that area. Right?
No, but it's not that. It's editing things to make deceptive editing.
Joe,
so in deceptive editing, you give people a different perception of who this candidate is than reality.
All right, but you got to explain.
But that's not objective journalism.
I know, but
that's campaigning for that person.
Right, but
it's just another overblown internet narrative, or are we watching the Crocs form in a carefully protected image? Stay with us, because the drama behind these reports is only just beginning. The conversation being discussed in these reports did not begin with tension. According to commentary circulating online, everything started calmly, almost casually, with light remarks and familiar talking points. The setting was described as relaxed, the tone initially friendly, and the expectations low. Fans who tuned in believed they were about to witness another predictable exchange, where opinions would be stated, nods would be exchanged, and the moment would pass without consequence. But as many commentators now point out, that calm was only the surface. Underneath it, something far more volatile was already building. As the discussion moved forward, reports suggest that subtle shifts began to appear. Pauses grew slightly longer. Responses became less polished. What some viewers describe as confidence slowly transformed.
I don't have those details. I don't know that I agree with your analysis of it. I don't know enough.
I think that's universally accepted that that's what they did.
Then you got to tell me why he is suing ABC. Why he's suing Meta.
Let's just talk about the 60 Minutes
no,
one
but
first.
No, but it's not just
we could go to ABC, but I'm not aware of that one either.
Well, George Stephanopoulos said something that he didn't like. But the point is,
what did Stephanopoulos say?
I can't remember. It was I honestly don't remember. But
well, I think what he was saying was factually incorrect about the results of one of Trump's trials.
All right. Guess what? If I were to sue everybody who said things that were factually incorrect about me, I'd be
into guarded hesitation. It was not loud or explosive at first. Instead, it was the kind of tension that creeps in quietly, the kind that makes an audience lean closer without fully understanding why. Fans online say they sensed it instantly, even before the tone changed. Something was off, and everyone could feel it. Commentators claim that the shift became obvious when the topic turned toward media narratives and political money. What was once framed as a general discussion reportedly narrowed into pointed questions. According to reactions shared afterwards, one side appeared comfortable challenging long-held assumptions, while the other seemed momentarily unsure how to respond. Emotions ran high, not because of shouting, but because of the weight behind each word. Viewers say it felt like watching someone realize they were no longer in control of the conversation. Social media lit up almost immediately after these moments were clipped and shared. Fans began arguing over interpretations. Some insisted the questions were fair and overdue, while others accused the host of pushing too hard. The guest, according to reports, appeared to grow more defensive as the exchange continued. Facial expressions were analyzed frame by frame. Body language experts weighed in. Even the small
gestures became evidence in an unfolding drama that seemed to grow larger by the hour. According to those covering the story, the most talked about moment came when money and influence were brought into the discussion. The narrative spreading online suggests that a comparison was made that shifted the balance instantly. Fans say this was the moment when the guest hesitated, as if searching for a response that would land safely. That hesitation, brief as it may have been, became a focal point. Emotions surged in the comment sections, with viewers claiming that silence spoke louder than words. Reactions from supporters were swift and emotional. Some defended the guest passionately, arguing that no one could be expected to respond perfectly under pressure. Others claimed the hesitation proved a deeper hypocrisy that had gone unchallenged for years. Friends and allies reportedly took to social media to clarify, contextualize, and soften the narrative. Critics, meanwhile, doubled down, framing the moment as symbolic of a broader issue within modern political discourse. Commentary channels amplified the drama further by adding personal stakes to the story. Reports began to frame the exchange not just as a disagreement, but as a clash of identities and reputations. One side was portrayed as an outsider who thrives on confrontation, while the other was depicted as someone accustomed to friendly environments. Fans were shocked by how quickly this framing took hold, transforming a conversation into a perceived showdown with winners and losers. As clips continued to circulate, new interpretations emerged. Some viewers claimed the tension was exaggerated by selective editing. Others argued that even without dramatic cuts, the discomfort was undeniable. Emotions ran high across platforms as people projected their own frustrations onto the moment. Families of supporters reportedly found themselves divided, with some praising the confrontation and others calling it disrespectful. The conversation had escaped its original context and taken on a life of its own. What made the situation even more intense, according to reports, was the discussion around journalism itself. Accusations of bias, selective storytelling, and deceptive editing entered the narrative, raising the stakes dramatically. Fans reacted strongly to these claims, seeing them as either brave truths or dangerous attacks. The guest's defense of established institutions was met with skepticism from some and applause from others, deepening the divide among viewers. Commentators describe a moment when the exchange became less about policy and more about trust. Who controls the narrative?
who decides what the public sees, and who benefits when stories are shaped in a certain way. This shift reportedly changed the energy in the room. Viewers say it felt heavier, more personal. The guest appeared to slow down, choosing words carefully, while the host maintained steady pressure without raising his voice. As the discussion progressed, reactions grew louder outside the conversation than within it. Fans debated late into the night, creating threads that stretched for thousands of comments. Memes emerged, reaction videos multiplied. Each new voice added another layer to the drama. Some claimed this was a defining moment that exposed long-standing issues. Others dismissed it as overblown commentary fueled by algorithms and outrage culture. By the time the conversation reached what many now call its most uncomfortable stretch, the narrative had already been set in motion. Reports suggest that both sides recognized the weight of what was happening, even if they interpreted it differently. There was no dramatic exit, no shouting match, no clear resolution. Instead, there was a lingering sense of unease that viewers carried with them long after the conversation ended. And that lingering feeling is what continues to drive the story forward. Fans are still debating intentions, critics are still questioning motives, supporters are still defending character. What began as a discussion has been transformed into a cultural moment through commentary, reaction, and speculation. The emotions surrounding it have not faded. If anything, they have grown stronger as more voices join the conversation, each convinced they see the truth more clearly than the last. The discussion that is now being talked about across commentary channels did not explode all at once. According to reports and reactions, it unfolded slowly, almost deceptively calm. At first, it sounded like a familiar exchange, the kind audiences have heard countless times before. The atmosphere was described as controlled, even respectful. Nothing about the opening moments suggested that this conversation would soon be dissected, replayed, and debated across the internet. Fans tuning in expected another routine appearance, another predictable back and forth that would fade by the next news cycle. But as
viewers now point out, the tension was already there, hiding beneath the surface. The questions, while casual in tone, began to narrow in focus. Instead of broad statements, they started to touch on specific claims, specific narratives, and specific examples that have been simmering in public debate for years. Fans say this is when the energy in the room subtly shifted. Responses became longer, more careful. Words were chosen with visible caution, as if each sentence carried more weight than intended. According to online reactions, the real change came when the subject of media credibility entered the conversation. What had once been framed as a neutral discussion suddenly took on a sharper edge. Viewers claim that the questions began to challenge assumptions that are rarely questioned in friendly settings. Emotions ran high, not because voices were raised, but because expectations were being disrupted. Fans noticed the difference immediately. This was no longer a comfortable exchange, it was becoming something else entirely. Commentators say that the guest appeared momentarily unsettled by the direction of the discussion. Pauses stretched just a little longer than before. Answers circled around the question rather than landing directly on it. Supporters argue this was simply thoughtfulness under pressure. Critics insist it was hesitation. Either way, the audience sensed vulnerability, and that vulnerability became the fuel that drove the narrative forward. As the conversation moved deeper into the topic of political influence, reports suggest the tone grew heavier. Comparisons were introduced that forced uncomfortable reflections. Viewers online describe a moment where the room felt quieter, even though the discussion continued. It was the kind of silence that makes people hold their breath, waiting for a response that might never fully satisfy. Fans replayed this moment repeatedly, analyzing every second as if it held a hidden meaning. Reactions poured in almost instantly once short clips began circulating. Some viewers praised the exchange as refreshing and honest. Others accused it of being unfair and confrontational. Emotions ran high on both sides. Comment sections filled with arguments, with supporters defending intent and critics questioning credibility. Friends and allies reportedly stepped in to contextualize the remarks, while opponents seized the moment to push their own interpretations. What intensified the drama, according to commentary channels, was how quickly the narrative shifted from discussion to perceived confrontation. Headlines began framing the moment as a turning point, a clash rather than a conversation. Fans were shocked by how fast this framing took hold. What started as nuanced dialogue was now being described as a test of composure and control. Each reaction video added another layer, amplifying emotions and solidifying opinions. Reports also highlight how personal stakes were projected onto the exchange. Viewers didn't just see two public figures talking, they saw symbols of opposing worlds colliding. One side was portrayed as representing establishment thinking, while the other was framed as challenging it head-on. Families of supporters reportedly found themselves debating at dinner tables, divided over what the moment truly represented. The conversation had spilled beyond screens and into real life. As the topic of trust in journalism came up again, accusations began to surface within the commentary itself.
Some fans claimed this was the first time they had seen these questions asked so directly. Others argued the framing was misleading and designed to provoke. Emotions ran high as people questioned motives. Was this about truth, or was it about spectacle? The lack of a clear answer only deepened the intrigue. Commentators point out that the guests' defense of established media outlets became a lightning rod for criticism. Supporters applauded the stance as principled. Critics dismissed it as out of touch. The host's steady tone, paired with persistent questioning, created a contrast that viewers found compelling. There was no shouting, no dramatic interruption, yet the tension felt undeniable. Fans described it as watching pressure build without a release. As the exchange continued, reactions outside the conversation grew louder than the conversation itself. Memes appeared within hours. Reaction thumbnails exaggerated expressions and pauses. Each new interpretation pushed the story further from its origin and deeper into spectacle. Emotions ran high as people argued not just about what was said, but about what it supposedly meant for the future of public discourse. By the time the discussion reached what many now consider its most revealing stretch, the narrative was already locked in. Viewers had chosen sides. Supporters and critics were no longer listening to the same conversation. They were hearing entirely different stories shaped by expectation and belief.
Monolithic audio synthesis engine had become a mirror, reflecting whatever the audience brought to it. And this is where the drama truly took root, not in a single sentence or moment, but in the accumulation of pauses, reactions, and interpretations. What began as a conversation had evolved into a symbol. Fans continued to debate whether it exposed uncomfortable truths or manufactured conflict. The uncertainty itself keeps the story alive, pulling more voices into the discussion and ensuring that the tension surrounding it refuses to fade. As the conversation moved forward, reports suggest the emotional undercurrent became impossible to ignore. What had started as careful questioning slowly turned into something heavier, something that carried personal weight. Viewers following the clips later claimed they could sense frustration building, not through anger, but through restraint. Each response seemed measured, yet slightly tense, as if every word needed to pass an internal filter before being spoken. Fans were shocked by how quickly the mood shifted from casual to cautious. Commentary channels began pointing out that the discussion around money and influence was where everything truly changed. According to reports, a comparison was raised that forced an uncomfortable pause. It was not framed as an accusation, but it landed like one. Viewers described a moment where the guest appeared to search for stable ground, adjusting posture, slowing speech, and choosing language more carefully than before. That pause, brief but noticeable, became one of the most replayed moments across platforms. Emotions ran high in the aftermath of that exchange. Supporters rushed to explain that thoughtful pauses are a sign of seriousness, not weakness. Critics argued the hesitation revealed a crack in a long-protected narrative. Reaction videos zoomed in on facial expressions, body language, and tone shifts, turning seconds of footage into entire theories. The conversation itself continued, but the audience was already rewriting it in real time. Reports circulating online suggest that this was also the point where the guest began leaning more heavily on familiar defenses. References to systems, institutions, and historical credibility became more frequent. Fans who admired that approach saw it as a stand for stability and experience. Others saw it as avoidance. Emotions ran high as both sides accused each other of bad faith, turning interpretation into identity. The host, according to commentators, maintained a calm and steady presence throughout. There were no raised voices, no dramatic interruptions. Instead, the pressure came from consistency. The questions did not disappear. They returned, slightly rephrased, slightly sharpened, each time asking for clarity rather than rhetoric. Viewers described this as more unsettling than outright confrontation. It left little room to pivot without being noticed. As the topic shifted toward media practices, the discussion reportedly took on a moral tone. Accusations of bias and selective storytelling entered the conversation, not as declarations but as concerns. Fans online describe a noticeable tightening in the atmosphere at this point. The guest responses grew more defensive, focusing on intent rather than outcome. Supporters applauded the effort to protect institutions they trust. Critics questioned why those institutions deserved protection at all. Reaction from the broader audience was swift and divided. Families of longtime supporters reportedly found themselves arguing over dinner tables and group chats. Some felt the exchange was disrespectful and unfair. Others believed it was long overdue. Emotions ran high as people projected their own experiences with media onto the conversation, seeing it not just as a podcast moment, but as validation or betrayal. Commentary channels began layering additional drama onto the narrative by introducing personal stakes. They spoke about reputations built over decades, images carefully maintained, and audiences conditioned to expect certain tones. The idea that one uncomfortable conversation could challenge all of that sent shockwaves to fan communities. Viewers were shocked not just by what was said, but by how fragile confidence can appear under sustained scrutiny. According to reports, the guest attempted to reframe the discussion by warning about broader consequences. The idea that challenging media too aggressively could lead to intimidation and fear was raised. Supporters saw this as a principled stand for press freedom. Critics interpreted it as emotional pressure. Emotions ran high as the conversation drifted from specifics into philosophy, blurring the line between caution and deflection.
The host's response to this reframing became another focal point in the commentary. Instead of escalating, he reportedly slowed things down even more, emphasizing distinctions between accountability and punishment. Fans who supported this approach praised the
calm explanation. Others felt it missed the emotional weight of the concern being raised. Once again, the audience split, each side hearing a different message. As clips of these moments circulated, new narratives formed almost instantly. Some headlines framed the exchange as a trap, others described it as an honest test. Reaction thumbnails exaggerated expressions, turning subtle discomfort into dramatic visuals. The original conversation became less important than the story built around it. Emotions ran high as viewers argued not just about content, but about intent. What added to the intensity was the guests' occasional admission of uncertainty. Statements suggesting a lack of detailed knowledge on certain points were seized upon by critics as signs of unpreparedness. Supporters countered that honesty about limits is a strength, not a flaw. This debate fueled countless threads, with fans dissecting what leadership should look like under pressure. Commentary also highlighted how the conversation refused to offer a clean resolution. There was no moment where one side clearly conceded or triumphed. Instead, the discussion lingered in ambiguity. Viewers were left to fill in the gaps themselves, and many did so passionately. Emotions ran high as certainty became a personal choice rather than a shared conclusion. As the exchange continued, it became clear that the real drama was unfolding outside the conversation. Reaction videos outpaced the original content. Interpretations hardened into beliefs. What had been said mattered less than what people felt had been revealed. Trust, doubt, admiration, and disappointment all collided in the aftermath, creating a narrative that grew louder with every retelling. By the time this stretch of the conversation ended, the story had already escaped its source. It was no longer about a single exchange or a single question. It was about perception, identity, and control. Fans continued to argue over whether this moment exposed something real or simply reflected existing divisions. That unresolved tension keeps the narrative alive, pulling more viewers into a drama that feels far bigger than the conversation that sparked it. As the reports continued to spread, the narrative surrounding the conversation grew darker and more complex. What had once been framed as a tense but intellectual exchange was now being described as a moment of exposure. Commentary channels began suggesting that the discomfort seen on screen was not accidental, but the result of long-suppressed questions finally being asked out loud. Fans were shocked by how quickly the tone of the coverage escalated, transforming hesitation into alleged revelation. According to reactions circulating online, the discussion about lawsuits and accountability became a turning point. The idea that legal action against media organizations could intimidate journalism sparked intense emotional responses. Supporters of the guest argued that this concern was rooted in history, pointing to moments when power was used to silence dissent. Critics countered that this framing ignored the difference between honest reporting and manipulation. Emotions ran high as both sides accused the other of deliberately missing the point. Viewers noted that during the stretch of the conversation, the guest appeared increasingly cautious. Responses grew longer, layered with explanations and warnings. Fans sympathetic to this approach saw wisdom and restraint. Others perceived it as a retreat from the original question. The contrast between intention and interpretation became impossible to ignore. Every sentence was now filtered through expectation, making neutrality feel out of reach. Commentary channels added fuel to the fire by highlighting moments where the host calmly pressed forward. There was no dramatic confrontation, no raised voice to signal aggression. Instead, the tension came from persistence. The same concern was revisited from different angles, forcing the guest to address it repeatedly. Viewers described this as exhausting to watch, yet impossible to turn away from. Emotions ran high because the pressure felt relentless, even without overt hostility. As the conversation shifted towards examples involving other media outlets, the drama deepened further. Reports suggest that references to past misstatements and corrections were introduced as evidence of a broader pattern. Supporters of the guest dismissed these examples as minor errors blown out of proportion. Critics saw them as proof of systemic bias. Families of viewers reportedly found themselves divided once again, arguing over whether mistakes should be forgiven or scrutinized. The emotional weight of the exchange appeared to intensify when uncertainty was openly acknowledged. Moments where the guest admitted not recalling specific details became viral flashpoints. Some fans praised the honesty, saying it humanized the exchange. Others seized on it as a sign of unpreparedness. Reaction videos slowed these moments down, replaying them repeatedly, transforming simple admissions into symbols of weakness or integrity, depending on the viewer's perspective. Commentators also began to frame the exchange as a battle between control and chaos. The guest was portrayed as someone accustomed to guiding narratives, while the host was depicted as comfortable letting conversations unpredictably. Fans were shocked by how this framing resonated. It suggested that the real conflict was not ideological, but structural. Who sets the rules, who asks the questions, and who decides when an answer is sufficient? Emotions ran high as the conversation drifted into broader cultural territory. The topic was no longer just media bias or legal accountability. It became about trust itself. Who deserves it, who has lost it, and how easily it can be shaken.
Viewers described feeling unsettled, not because of what was proven, but because of what felt uncertain. The lack of a clear villain or hero made the drama more personal, forcing audiences to confront their own assumptions. Commentary channels amplified this uncertainty by introducing speculative language. Phrases like exposed, cornered, and revealed dominated headlines. Supporters pushed back, accusing these outlets of exaggeration. Critics argued exaggeration was justified given the stakes. Emotions ran high as both sides accused each other of manufacturing outrage while claiming to defend truth. The irony of these accusations only deepened the divide. As the exchange continued to circulate, reactions from public figures added new layers to the story. Some praised the conversation as necessary and overdue. Others criticized it as irresponsible and misleading. These endorsements and condemnations became part of the narratives themselves, turning the original discussion into a litmus test for allegiance. Fans felt pressured to pick sides, even if they had initially approached the story with curiosity rather than conviction. The discussion around responsibility also took center stage. Commentators debated whether public figures should be held to higher standards during unscripted conversations. Supporters argued that perfection should not be expected. Critics insisted accountability is meaningless without pressure. Emotions ran high as this debate touched on deeper fears about transparency and performance in modern public life. What made this stretch of the narrative particularly intense was the absence of closure. There was no decisive moment where the conversation resolved its central tension. Instead, it drifted, leaving questions unanswered. Viewers described feeling unsettled, yet compelled, as if the lack of resolution demanded further discussion. This open-endedness allowed the story to grow, inviting endless interpretation and speculation. Reaction videos multiplied rapidly during this phase. Some focused on tone and pacing, others analyzed facial expressions and word choice. Each interpretation reinforced the idea that something significant had occurred, even if no one could agree on exactly what. Emotions ran high as viewers projected their hopes and frustrations onto the exchange, turning it into a mirror rather than a message. By the end of this portion of the conversation, the narrative had fully detached from its source. It was no longer about what was said, but about what people believed it represented. Trust in institutions, frustration with narratives, fear of manipulation, and hunger for authenticity all collided. Fans continue to argue whether this moment marked a shift or simply revealed existing cracks. That uncertainty keeps the drama alive, ensuring the story continues to evolve long after the original words were spoken. As the story entered its final phase across commentary platforms, the focus shifted from the exchange itself to its wider impact. Reports began emphasizing how moments like these ripple outward, shaping perception long after the words stop. Fans were shocked by how quickly opinions hardened. People who had never watched a full conversation suddenly felt certain they understood everything about it. Emotions ran high as confidence replaced curiosity, and speculation filled the gaps left by unanswered questions. Commentary channels leaned heavily into the idea that the conversation symbolized a larger cultural shift. According to these reports, audiences are no longer satisfied with polished appearances and predictable talking points. They want friction, they want unpredictability, and they want to see how public figures respond when control slips, even slightly. Supporters of this view argued that the discomfort on display was precisely the point. Critics accused these commentators of glorifying tension for clicks. The debate itself became another layer of drama. As reactions continued to pour in, friends and longtime allies of the guest reportedly attempted to soften the narrative. They spoke about intent,
context, and decades of work that should not be reduced to a single exchange. Fans sympathetic to this perspective echoed those sentiments, warning against oversimplification. Others dismissed these defenses as damage control. Emotions ran high as loyalty clashed with skepticism, leaving little room for middle ground. The host's role in the narrative also evolved. Some commentators portrayed him as a truth seeker who refused to back down. Others framed him as someone who thrived on discomfort and controversy. This split perception mirrored the broader divide among viewers. Supporters praised his calm persistence. Critics questioned his motivations. Once again, the same behavior was interpreted in completely different ways depending on the audience's expectations. What intensified the drama further was the ongoing discussion about legacy media. Reports suggested that this conversation reopened old wounds about trust, editing, and narrative control. Fans who already felt disillusioned saw confirmation of their fears. Others worried that constant skepticism could erode faith in all institutions, even those that still strive for fairness. Emotions ran high as people debated whether criticism strengthens journalism or undermines it entirely. Commentary also highlighted how the lack of a clear resolution kept the story alive. There was no apology, no concession, no dramatic turning point that neatly wrapped things up.
Instead, the conversation ended with lingering tension. Viewers described feeling unsettled, as if something important had been raised but not fully addressed. That unresolved feeling became the engine driving further discussion, ensuring the story would not fade quietly. As days passed, new angles continued to emerge. Some reports focused on the psychological dynamics of the exchange, describing it as a study in pressure and response. Others framed it as a warning about what happens when public figures step outside controlled environments. Fans were shocked by how many interpretations could exist simultaneously, each claiming to reveal the true meaning of the moment. Emotions ran high when the conversation was linked to broader political narratives. Supporters and critics alike began using it as evidence for their existing beliefs. For some, it proved that certain figures are unprepared for unscripted scrutiny. For others, it demonstrated the dangers of confrontational media. The exchange became a tool, wielded differently by each side, its original nuance fading with every retelling. Families and friend groups reportedly continued to feel the impact. Debates spilled into everyday conversations, with people arguing not just about what happened, but about what it says about society. Trust in media, trust in leaders, and trust in each other all came under scrutiny. Emotions ran high because the conversation touched something personal, something deeper than policy or personality. Commentary channels began asking whether moments like this mark a turning point or simply reflect long-standing divides. Some suggested that audiences are finally demanding authenticity, even if it comes with discomfort. Others warned that constant confrontation could lead to cynicism and fatigue. These competing narratives kept viewers engaged, each one offering a different lens through which to view the same exchange. As the story continued to circulate, fatigue mixed with fascination. Some viewers expressed exhaustion with endless analysis, while others could not look away. The repetition of clips did not dull their impact. Instead, each replay seemed to reinforce whatever conclusion the viewer had already reached. Emotions ran high because certainty had replaced openness, leaving little space for reconsideration. What stands out in this phase of the narrative is how little the original conversation matters on its own. Stripped of commentary, it becomes just another exchange. Layered with reactions, interpretations, and speculation, it transforms into something far larger. Fans continue to debate whether this transformation reveals truth or manufactures drama. The answer often depends on what they believed before pressing play. As the coverage begins to slow, one thing remains clear in the reports. The conversation has become a reference point, a shorthand for broader frustrations and hopes. It is cited in arguments about media integrity, public accountability, and the nature of unscripted dialogue. Even those who dismiss it as overblown cannot escape its presence in the discourse. Emotions ran high not because of a single explosive moment, but because of accumulation. Pauses, questions, hesitations, and interpretations stacked on top of each other until they formed a narrative too large to ignore. Fans are left with questions that have no definitive answers. Was something truly exposed, or was this simply a reflection of what people wanted to see? And that uncertainty is what keeps the story alive. Without closure, it
lingers, resurfacing whenever discussions about media, power, or authenticity arise. Commentary channels may move on to new topics, but this moment remains archived in reaction videos and online debates. Whether remembered as a turning point or a manufactured storm, it continues to shape conversations, proving that sometimes the aftermath matters more than the moment itself. Now it's your turn. You've seen how these reports are being framed, how reactions are spreading, and how one conversation has turned into a full-blown media storm. Fans are shocked, emotions ran high, and the debate is far from settled. Some people believe this moment revealed uncomfortable truths, while others think it's just another example of commentary spinning ordinary exchanges into dramatic narratives. The question is, where do you stand after seeing all this unfold? This is not about telling you what to think. It's about asking you to think for yourself. Do you believe the tension people are talking about was real? Or do you think it was exaggerated by clips, headlines, and reaction videos? Was this a rare moment of honesty that caught someone off guard? Or was it simply another case of viewers projecting their own frustrations onto a conversation? The answers are not simple, and that's exactly why this story refuses to die. If you enjoyed breaking down this drama with us, make sure you show your support. Hit the like button so more people can join the conversation and decide for themselves what all the noise is really about. Subscribe to the channel if you want more deep dives into trending stories, viral moments, and the kind of commentary that looks beyond the headlines and into the reactions shaping public opinion. Most importantly, drop your thoughts in the comments. Did these reports change how you see the situation, or did they confirm what you already believed? Do you think moments like this push media toward accountability, or do they just add to the chaos? Your voice matters here, and the comment section is where this conversation continues. Stay tuned, because stories like this don't end when the video does. They evolve with every reaction, every clip, and every opinion shared. And the next twist is always just one headline away.